We're going to give everybody about another 30 to 45 seconds to enter into the Zoom room here, and then we'll get started. While we're waiting for folks to come into the room, I just want to remind you all that after today's webinar, we have another one on the 20th of January with some faculty members from the chemistry department at Colorado State University. We have on the 27th, Flower Darby, who's the author of Small Teaching. And then we have on the 28th, Tanya and Jennifer, also from Colorado State University, instructional designers there to talk to us about some instructional strategies as well. So we are hoping that we'll be able to see you all come in for that. Looks like our numbers have stabilized. So welcome to the Every Learner Everywhere Strategies for Success in Online Teaching and Learning, the reprise of our interactive conference series. It's a pleasure for you to be with us today. It's a pleasure for us to be here for you. My name is Norma Hollebeck, and I'm the manager of network programs and services with Every Learner Everywhere. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to take out just a couple of minutes to tell you about Every Learner Everywhere, the mission of our network, and who we are. So Every Learner Everywhere is a collaboration of 12 higher education organizations with the expertise in evaluating, implementing, scaling, and measuring the efficacy of digital learning and its integration into pedagogical practice. Every Learner Everywhere is one of 3 solution networks sponsored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Here at Every Learner, we work with colleges and universities to build capacity among faculty and instructional support staff to improve student outcomes with digital learning. Our mission is to help institutions use new technology to innovate teaching and learning with the ultimate goal of increasing student success, especially for first-generation college students, poverty-affected students, and students of color. A few quick housekeeping notes. We are recording today's presentation, which we will share after the webinar. Throughout the presentation, we welcome your questions in the Q&A section. If participants raise their hand during the presentation, we will not be able to unmute you. However, we will be monitoring the Q&A as well as the chat. So, as a biology professor and a recovering associate dean, I'm excited about today's conversation, starting with the learner, inclusive instruction as teaching with social justice. Our speaker today is Dr. Joel Amadon. Joel completed his doctoral studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, go Badgers, and is an associate professor in the Department of Teacher Education at the University of Mississippi. He is, let's see how I get this long list of things here straight. He is a co-host for the Teaching Math Teaching podcast, co-host of the Teacher's Journey, Mile Markers on the Road to Better Teaching podcast, host of the Amidon Planet podcast, and a former high school mathematics teacher. Joel's specializations in mathematics education and the improvement of pedagogy to address issues of equity and diversity. So simply put, Dr. Amadon's work is focused on leading people to love others through teaching. So I am going to now hand it over to Dr. Amadon, and we're going to have some fun here.
All right. Good afternoon to most folks here. And let's see, share my screen. Let's try that again. There we go. Okay. So I think a number of links have been put out there to different, my slides and the website, amidonplanet.com/strategies for success. Just an invitation to add to the Jamboard there. So if you go to that link that's put in the chat, amidonplanet.com/strategies for success, you'll see a link to the Jamboard. There might be a direct link to the Jamboard as well. Just your name, institution, role in teaching would be great, just to see if we can use this tool a little bit to get to know each other a little bit better. So what, there we go. Just want to make sure things are working. Fantastic. So I put in a little example there. Give you a second to do that. And the one thing I wanted to point out with that link, amidonplanet.com/strategies for success. So everything that we mentioned here and all those links that were just shared by Patty can be accessed through that link. And so, you know, if you're trying to write down where something's from, it's all going to be there. All the slides are there. And so, and then we're using this tool of Jamboards, not the greatest tool ever, but it's one thing, and we'll get to why we're using this tool in a sec, but just to have some sort of record of things. So as people are sharing great things in the chat, there'll be places to put things on the Jamboard as well. So we have some sort of institutional or some record beyond this webinar, so that when we sign off, things are still there. And that's, again, another way that we can be inclusive to make sure that people can access these ideas and great expertise that exists in the Zoom room. So again, my talk is starting with a learner, inclusive instruction as teaching with social justice. And again, as Norma said, that I host a number of podcasts. I kind of like doing podcasts, and got this little setup in my little COVID closet in the back of my garage here. And we're dealing with a situation just right now here in our local town where they had to shut down schools today. So I got the kids in the other room. They're all fed and everything, and make sure that they're off the internet. So we should be just fine. But just dealing with the things that we have to deal with, and just knowing that we're just going to keep plowing forward. But anyway, so starting with the learner, inclusive instruction as teaching with social justice, what we want to do is define first, thinking about, well, what do you mean by teaching with social justice? So I'll make sure I'm doing here. So teaching with social justice is one way that you can combine these ideas of teaching and social justice. So my advisor at Wisconsin, Anita Wager, she and her work would talk about in her dissertation about teaching for, about, and with social justice. So just want to make sure that we're differentiating between those two, or between those three, so that we're not thinking them all the same. So for example, teaching about social justice is when we think about reading the world while promoting a relationship with content. So thinking about, if you're familiar with Freire, talked about reading the world and thinking about how do we understand the world while we're learning the content. We're developing this relationship with content, so that helps us understand the world a little bit better. So for example, in the curriculum that I taught with as a high school math teacher, we use a problem like this: Daytona 500, as the speed goes up, what happens to the duration of the race, right? Speed goes up, time goes down, and there's an inverse variation there. So they're kind of reading the world a little bit, but this is one slice of the world. Well, at the same time I was doing this problem, at the same time as the Deepwater Horizon oil spill was occurring. And if you remember, at that time, the amount of oil that was being predicted to come out of the earth and it to be spilled out into the ocean, that number kept getting increasing all the time. So it seemed like, hey, this is a way that we can learn about inverse variation while at the same time understanding how big of a disaster this is. And so we just needed a constant to compare these rates to. And so the constant we used was the amount that was spilled out when the XL Valdez crashed up in Alaska a long time ago, or a while ago. And so using that as a way to, again, read the world by developing this relationship with content, in this case, mathematics. So that's teaching. That was teaching about social justice. So thinking about teaching for social justice, we talk about reading and writing the world while promoting a relationship with the content. So not just learning about the world, but then acting upon it, right? So again, that's talking about reading and writing the world with mathematics. Rico Gutstein talks about that, and when he's talking about teaching math for social justice. And this was something that we try to do as well, where there was a instance where, and again, this is a kind of a superficial, but for a kid in a high school math classroom, this was a big deal, where they thought we had too much homework all the time. Oh my gosh, Amidon, why do we have so much homework? And then a kid, Charlie, a pseudonym we use, said, hey, Amidon, you give so much effing, why do you give so much effing homework? And I'm like, oh my gosh. Well, one, Charlie, he didn't use that word, he used the actual word. I'm like, Charlie, watch your language. But two, hey, that was a very passionate question that he asked, and right, where he's curious about his world. He was analyzing a question, or he was questioning the world. So like, why don't we use the tools that we've been learning in math class in order to answer that question? So we did an investigation. We collected data around their homework, the time they have spent on homework. And that gave us a chance to think about truthiness of data and outliers and all sorts of things where they could analyze and make some hypotheses, and then come up with some conclusion and some action steps, and actually write on the world and make suggestions. Maybe they said, hey, here's some suggestions for better practices with your homework. And Charlie eventually came back and said, hey, Amidon, you actually don't give a lot of homework compared to others. And I felt good about that. But anyway, it got us talking about what is the purpose of homework, and that gave kids agency through investigation of the content. So again, we were teaching for social justice. And if you're interested in that sort of stuff, like teaching math for social justice, some great resources just came out. This book, High School Math Lessons to Explore, Understand, and Respond to Social Injustice, is by Basil Conway, Robert Berry, Brian Lawler, and Robert Berry. That's an awesome resource if you're interested in teaching for social justice. It's about math, but if you're interested in just the thinking behind that and how you can interlace social justice ideas within content and teaching for social, I would highly recommend. This is a link to a podcast episode where we talk about book club. So in the show notes for this episode, we lay out all the different content that we had around this book. What's cool is that more books are coming out from different content areas or different levels. So elementary, early childhood, and middle school on teaching math for social, if you're interested in that sort of thing. And then we get to teaching with social justice. And this is what I think is foundational. If we're going to be thinking about all these different things, if we're going to be thinking about teaching about social justice, if we want to do that, I don't think you can do that without teaching with social justice. To be like, hey, look at all the injustices out that are happening out in the world or even within our classroom. But then you think about the injustices that exist within your classroom. How can we be more equitable and inclusive in our own teaching? So we call this promoting a relationship with content through inclusive and equitable teaching practices. So this is the how things happen within our classroom. And so what are we doing there to make sure that it's foundational, that we are attempting to teach with social justice? And again, it's not just something like, oh, we're doing it and now we're done. It's kind of like, I kind of relate it to when Ibram X. Kendi talks about being anti-racist. It's a continuous decision process. It's not just, oh, I'm now this and I don't have any more work to do. No, it's a continuous, every single day, every single decision. So, it's constant, especially if we're in a academic cycle, looking at your own practices and thinking, what have I done recently and how can I be more equitable and inclusive in what I do in this next phase, especially lately when the modalities have changed, all these different circumstances changes around what we're trying to do. So teaching with social justice, an example could be if this article from Joe Bowler and Megan Staples talks about the story of Railside High School that's in California. Again, that's a pseudonym as well. But they looked at this Railside school, which taught with heterogeneous math classes using a reform-oriented approach. And when they did the studies, they did the qualitative and quantitative analysis, they found that in this Railside place, compared to other schools that had more traditional focus, traditional instructional practices, that kids at Railside learned more, enjoyed mathematics more, and progressed to higher mathematics levels. And so looking at what was being done in that school and how they did it using complex instruction, small groups, again, untracked classes, and you saw the kinds of results that they did, it would seem like that would be a better way, a more just way to teach. And then even further papers down the line looked at, what, for the students that identified as male in the classroom, it really didn't matter between the traditional and the reform-oriented approach versus students that identified as female. There was a big difference. They performed much better in these sorts of classrooms. So it'd be like, what's the just decision, which way to teach? So teaching with social justice would be using such teaching practices, right? So teaching with social justice is about promoting a relationship with content through inclusive and equitable instruction practices. So that is what we're talking about here when we're talking about teaching with social justice. So there's an intent to the things that we want to do in our practice. And so given that kind of definition there, what have you seen or done that could be labeled as teaching with social justice? And so what I want you to do is, you've been to the a number of you have been to the Jamboard and seen, yep, lots of good stuff there. So if you could go to the second page in that Jamboard and think about using that definition. What have you seen or done that could be labeled as teaching with social justice? Can you provide an answer to that question using that definition? If you head to that Jamboard, back to that Jamboard, and provide a response, put a little sticky on there. Give you a minute to do that as I'm looking to see who's in the room. Again, you don't need to think about it as, right, maybe it's something you heard, maybe you came to the presentation yesterday from Jeremiah Sims and you heard about, oh, this is something due to teach with, there we go. Fantastic. Effort-based grading, multiple choices for students to demonstrate their learning, buffet style tests. Excellent. Yeah, giving students choices, right? How they're going to demonstrate their competence, right? That's excellent. Open educational resources, fantastic. Yeah, not I remember the $100 calculus books that just got reproduced on the boards every single day when I was in college. Yes, wide variety of photos in PowerPoint. Yes, make sure people are represented. Good stuff. Yeah, we're getting it. So great. So we want to take the temperature of the room, allow students to resubmit assignments to show their growth, right? What is the goal? The goal is to show what they know, right? And not, if it's not specifically at one time, if it's at a little bit down the road, why not? Perfect. Great. And keep collecting those ideas. It's exactly what we're looking for. So teaching with social justice. So again, this is the intent of this, is think about like this idea of to be equitable, inclusive. That's like a target for what we want to do, to be teaching with social justice. And so now I'm going to offer a framework to think about what are we going to do in these relationships. We know relationships are important in the classroom. I'm going to give 3 specific relationships we can be thinking about and how we can improve them with intent to be more equitable and inclusive in our teaching. Thank you for everyone that's put nice. Good stuff in here. I like the cool. Awesome. And I like too that it's kept here on Jamboard, because then again, we'll have our memory that's associated with this presentation that'll exist beyond our chat. Okay. So again, as you see over and over again, I talk about relationships, and really relationships are pretty important. Obviously, we know that relationships with my kids that are just inside and hopefully not on the internet is pretty important. Relationships with my students are important. My relationship with mathematics is important, right? And from my own perspective, and my relationship with how to teach mathematics, which is what I do. And so looking at the different roles that people have on the previous page of the Jamboard, so my goal is to be a good teacher of teachers of mathematics, right? And so thinking about that, I'm thinking about the ability to develop a relationship between my students and their relationship with the teaching of mathematics. I need to be thinking about that. That's important, right? And so I was really thinking about this when I was a high school math teacher, and I was getting some like articles like this from, I think this is from NPR, some sort of source like that. And I was hearing about these some cool ways of teaching math, right? And then I look at here and it's listing all these different ways. And I'm just going to read this real quick. Senior Sophie Dietz is dancing in front of a dry erase board, improving math theme lyrics to Christmas carols. Instead of poring over those fat old test books and working on piles of AP practice tests, she and her classmates are learning complicated concepts like integration by parts by making videos about them. Fantastic. Let's put this down as a way to, to offer different ways of teaching with social justice, right? But then you think about this. I want the calculus to be like a scary monster, and then we being like superheroes. And if you've seen any superhero movies, what do superheroes do to scary monsters? They cut their heads off. They kill them. Like it's not good, not good. And so that is something that I don't know Sophie, but I would say that, maybe her relationship with math might not be the best. And maybe she's thinking like, hey, I can get rid of what I have to do in math class and never see math again. Maybe that's my goal. And is that a great relationship that we want her to have? And so thinking about your content or what you teach, what kind of relationship, what is the desired relationship you want your students to have with the content? And so this idea of relationships with content, I originally got it when I was thinking of reading this book, Teaching Problems of Teaching, by Magdalene Lampert from, she's at the University of Michigan. She's at Michigan State University, I believe, when she was doing this work. But anyway, her lab was a 5th grade math classroom, and she just basically dumped her brain into this book. And so I give this book to beginning teachers and very experienced teachers, because it goes to the base level of like thinking about her decisions at the get-go about how she sets up her classroom. That's really good for a beginning teacher, to even highly theoretical things and advanced strategies and processes that she does in her classroom. So it's a great book. And I talk more about it on podcasts. Again, there'll be nothing but shameless plugs throughout this presentation. But anyway, She talks about facilitating a desired relationship with the content, right? That's the most important thing. Students are learning all sorts of different things about our content, but we want a desired relationship. Like when I'm thinking about the teaching of mathematics, I want to be thinking about, how are we doing problem solving? Or are we teaching kids to be executors of algorithms? Like, no, I want them to see math as a tool to solve problems, right? And so, yeah. So thinking about that, we have what Maggie Lampert would say is these three core relationships that we need to develop, or that we have a responsibility to develop as a teacher. We need to develop a relationship with students, a relationship with content, and the relationship between the students and content, a facilitatory relationship where we are helping to put things into play to facilitate the desired relationship that we want to give. And so that's something that we design, right? And so those are the practices of teaching. And so in thinking about designing things and designing experiences to put into place, I think about this quote from Halverson and Halverson: education is designed for learning. Because like I said, kids are learning, or learning's happening all the time. But education is something that we specifically design in order to happen to get to a specific outcome, or in this case, a desired relationship with the content. And so when I think about design, I like to think about universal design, because it's a way to approach it from a way that's more, again, equitable and inclusive, because again, we could have a knob that we can use to open a door. I got one in this closet here. It's great. You grab it, twist it, and it opens, right? But then what if I want to think about everyone that could be using this space? And can everyone use it? Could a small child use it? Could a small child get locked in here because they can't open the knob, because they don't have the strength to grab it and twist at the same time, or there's the size of their hand is not big enough. Or maybe it's someone that doesn't have a hand. They have some sort of a hook or something that they need to use in order to open the door. So, okay, yes, we can put something like this on and retrofit it. But really, what about if we use universal design and think from the get-go how to make something that's intentionally designed for more people to have access to, right? And so thinking about universal design and interacting with this problem space of teaching is the universal design process. And again, another shameless plug, Yvari Solner, who thinks a lot about universal design. She's one of the co-authors of the article we did, but basically, or that was done. Basically, universal design is about 4 key questions, and really thinking about who will engage in the lesson. Those are the learners, not students, but learners, because what do learners do? They learn, right? So thinking about content, what content will the students engage with? Then we're also thinking about process and product. Or let's kind of cruise through that. Content is what content will the students engage with. Those are pretty self-explanatory. Process, how will the students engage with the content? So thinking about, what are you doing in order to have them, what I would say, like play around with math in my world, or play around with the teaching of mathematics when I'm thinking about teaching teachers. So, and then what will be accepted as evidence of the students' learning? Like back already with when people put in the Jamboard for what they can see as teaching with social justice, there were already some things where people had alternative ways that people could be thinking about that were more equitable and inclusive, thinking about how can students show evidence of their students' learning. So then you overlap these two spaces, the problem space of teaching with this universal design process. We have our students as learners, our content as content. And then we think about process and product as a way to facilitate the desired relationship between content and learners. So again, we're about developing relationships. How are we developing these relationships with these 3 different things in order to get to this desired relationship we want between our learners and the content, right? And so this is what we call practice. So here's an example that I want to use with this framework is, so again, I teach elementary math methods, right? So students are coming in and they might not necessarily be as excited about elementary math methods as I am, which is okay. And then thinking about it from the pandemic perspective, where I had to do everything virtually, right? And so I used to have my students, practice teaching, doing some reform-oriented math instruction. Remember, open-ended tasks, using problem solving, in context problems, those sorts of things. In small groups, I would have them used to have them in a face-to-face space, design a problem that they would design as a small group and then put it into play as a small group. But it ended up being a very poor execution of, it didn't work. It didn't really develop the desired relationship. So then when the pandemic hit, and I'm like, I can't have one person or one group teaching a whole, a Zoom room full of their peers. And so what do we have to do? We created these things called virtual teaching groups. So you have, again, a number of pre-service teachers with a variety of relationships with the content already. They might not have much experiences with reform-oriented math instruction. Maybe they had very traditional math instruction. So these virtual teaching groups basically had them design lessons using these this basically very simple lesson plan template where they were asked to name their standard, name a task, or name a standard and see it mapped out on this Achieve the Core website, which I'll show in just a second. Name and link to the task on Illustrative Mathematics, a site that has tasks that are aligned with the standards, that are open, that are just like the kinds of problems we want them to do. They don't have to create them from scratch. And then think about what would they do to launch, explore, and summarize things that they've already done in previous classes, and then put it into play and teach it to their peers in a small Zoom breakout room. And then after they're done, reflect on what happens. And what happens is then they get evaluated on it. And we evaluate them on this rubric, like, do they plan appropriate and sequential teaching procedures? Did they have innovative opening and closers, right? Do they provide instructions so that people aren't lost in what's happening? Do they convey enthusiasm? Are they, hey, this is good stuff, let's get going on it. Like, are they convey enthusiasm for what they're doing? Are they providing opportunities for people to cooperate with each other? Are they asking how and why questions? And are they maximizing instructional time? And some of you might be saying, oh my gosh, Amidon, are you really going to grade them on that? No, I'm not grading them. We're evaluating them. The grading, and this goes back to the teaching with social justice pieces that some people put, is, you talk about effort. Hey, I'm giving them things that they control. Did they identify a standard? Did they identify a task from that website that aligned with the standard? Did they create a plan? Did they create Google Slides that they could then share and do their virtual teaching with? And then, yes, we do evaluate them, but if they did the blue stuff, they got full credit. And then if they did this stuff, is like a way for them to get better, because they would do this over and over throughout the semester in this safe space within their methods class where they could make mistakes. They could, and you see that there were some mistakes where people didn't do as well as we wanted them to. We wanted them to get to 2. We see some 1.5s. We see a 1. Hey, that shows them, hey, where do you need to improve for next time? And so this was a good way for them to have a safe space for them to look at, what does this kind of teaching look like, both when they did it and when they experienced it from their peers. And so again, allowing for them to develop a desired relationship with reform-oriented math instruction. Okay. So this is what we're trying to do in thinking about developing these relationships. And so the first relationship we wanted to talk about, again, think about developing these relationships around this idea of to be equitable and inclusive. We want to think about it from so I'm basically going to go through a number of different examples, and then I want to open it up for some feedback. So I'm going to cruise through this one. So first of all, thinking about our content and think about, what are we specifically asked to teach? What are our objectives? What are thinking about some of the things that people listed on the, how do you teach with social justice, or how have you seen teaching with social justice? If you don't know your objectives or what you're being asked to teach, and this is called Webb's depth of knowledge wheel. We use it in a lot of our teacher prep classes, and thinking about our objectives and thinking about, what are we going to, like, what is for level 1 of this wheel is kind of a level 1 is like trivia sort of stuff. Like, what are the facts that people need to know? What are the skills? What do they need to know how to do? Then how do you strategically use those facts and skills to do things? And then how do you create things? I'm actually reading the Andy Weir book, Project Hail Mary, same guy who wrote The Martian. But if you watch them, probably most of you have seen if you haven't, go watch The Martian. Martian's a great movie. But in that, throughout, you can see him going through this thing where he's using his facts that he knows. He's able to do certain things. He thinks strategically in order to solve problems, and even creates things using all that work. And so that is this whole idea of knowledge that we want our students to have coming into our classroom. But do we have those objectives listed from our syllabus? Do we know them? Do we know them in ways that students actually know them as well? Are they written in ways that students can approach, that, again, they understand what they're being asked to do in the course? Or is it just a miracle when all of a sudden a number shows up that gives them their value from the course? Or do they actually know what they need to, kind of knowledge they need to demonstrate? And so thinking about that from this is what they call the assessment pyramid, to think about, you're going to have a lot more DOK 1 or depth of knowledge 1 stuff in order to build on to get to the DOK 2 stuff. And then creating things, that's really high level stuff. So obviously you're going to have less of that. That's why we're calling it a pyramid and much narrower. So thinking about your objectives and how knowledgeable you are of those, what is your professional organizations that are around your content? There's lots of stuff for math that I could list off, but not all of you are math people, as you can see from the Jamboard. So, but like, for example, Achieve the Core has all these different, they map out the standards, and I want my students to be aware of this. I want to be aware of it, so we can see which standards go into which from the from each grade level, and how important different standards are and how we can see that, what kind of sort of vertical alignment are there between standards, all this knowledge about the content. If I'm developing that relationship, so I know exactly what I want to teach and how to teach it and how to communicate what students are have to know, then I'm developing that relationship with the content so I can then express that to my students. So I'm wondering, what have you done that could be labeled as developing a relationship with content in order to be more equitable and inclusive? And seeing that the Jamboard, the Jamboard shut down for a second because there's too many people in it. That's a great problem to have. But if that third slide on the Jamboard, what are people have been doing to develop a relationship with content? So that could be even like hypothetical learning trajectories or learning trajectories are something too, like exactly from a math perspective, like how do students think about certain concepts? How do you develop certain concepts? Or thinking about, what if there's new standards that are being labeled out there? These are things that just developing the relationship with content are things that you can do is almost like, as Norma talked about in my description, talking about leading people to love others. If I want to love on my students before I even know them, how do I develop that relationship with content? So what are things we could do to develop a relationship with content? Even that third slide on the Jamboard is a place that you can put that. And then if you have any questions so far, you can put something in the Q&A, or else I have the last slide of the Jamboard is what I call a parking lot, which is something I always like to do, a parking lot in if I'm having slides or something like that, in order to basically kind of have a, I don't know, exhaust or release valve for people to put things in case, like, oh my gosh, Amidon's still talking. I got to put a question for him somewhere, or like, hey, I want to make sure something gets addressed. Like I put my own first note there on things. So another way to, and that's something I learned from, there we go. Give the students real world examples, ask them to apply concepts. Also asking, asking students, where might they see this content, right? That you're putting out there? What analogies might they experience, right? Research using autoethnography, fantastic. Yeah, there's again, shameless plug, a podcast episode is like How to Love Your Neighbor. Dr. Burhanattin Keskin from the University of Mississippi did some research on autoethnography, and he gave some stories about his own experiences with inclusion or exclusion. It's kind of fascinating article that he talks about in that episode. That really helped me, like, what do I mean by inclusion? I really got a better relationship with that idea after talking with him. I like that autoethnography piece. Another thing too, relationship with content is like knowing where the content is going. I know from, again, a math ed perspective, the big thing that's coming out that people are talking about is data science. And I tell you, like in the last 6 months, I really didn't hear about data science, but now I'm becoming immersed in it. I'm starting to use some tools and because I need to start talking about that, because if I want to develop the relationship with my teachers so that they can incorporate that, I need to develop that relationship as well. So as you're hearing things that are coming down the pike and then being connected with online or your professional organizations that are associated with your world, like how are you getting to know, like, what are people talking about? What else do we need to talk about? What are the issues with our field, and how can we, be prepared to put those things within our content? Or even, like some of it's in some state, like they're thinking about how are they changing standards, how you can be a voice in those experiences as well. So that's a relationship with content. Thank you for those that are putting stuff in there. And again, if you still have things that like, oh, here's the way that we develop a relationship with content, please go ahead and put it in the Jamboard. I love being able to go back, because kind of in a frenzy right now going through the presentation. All right, then thinking about relationship with learners. Okay, so again, this is the one when most people think about, oh, I got to develop relationships in the classroom. Maybe you're not thinking about develop a relationship with content. Well, this is the one you probably do think about, developing a relationship with learners. And so, thinking about how do we do that, and so you're like, oh, I'll do the back to school survey and like, hey, hand this paper out, you fill out your contact information, what's your favorite color, and all this sort of stuff, which is fine. It shows that you care, but then like, what can you do with that really? Or like, even if it's a survey through you got some sort of Blackboard thing, or, maybe it's even an online discussion. How can you be a little bit more proactive? What are some things that can be done? So what I really like is there's a link to this in the slides, but I'll go to it right here. It's also on Amidon Planet on how to build relationships. But there is this episode of the Hidden Brain podcast, and it's still there, about how to create these connections between the instructors and their students. And even in a way that might not be like you're thinking about, like, oh, I got to know all my students. Well, it's maybe more important that some of this research says that they know you, right? And so the survey from Panorama, and it's a free little survey. I've used it before. Get to know your students from day one. It's actually, they're allowed to get to know you. And some of this research points that's really important there. Shoot, I can't see. Can't click. Sorry. Gotta go back. Try again. Too many things in the way of clicking. But anyway, on that site, there's this survey where you take the survey first. And what happens is then they identify with it. You get to see who identifies with you. They get to see if they have something that connects with you. So, if it's like you're into music, or you're into, you're passionate about the environment, or you like to go outdoors, or even just little things that they can help develop that relation, even if it's not even in what the research that's from that podcast episode was saying, from Dr. Girlback, so it would say is, even if it's even like something insubstantial, like I'm an owner of the Green Bay Packers. I have one share of stock. When Brett Favre won in 1997, I have one share of stock of the Green Bay Packers. Some of you might be Packer fans. Some of you might be Viking fans. And either way, we've just developed a little bit of a connection there. Or the fact that on my Spotify rundown for the year, Taylor Swift was my number one artist that I listened to. Now, some of you might be like, oh my gosh, and that's all of a sudden another connection. Or I have a black lab dog that's sitting in the other room, just wondering why I'm yelling in the closet in the back of the garage. All those sorts of things, those developing those connections that we've just did. There's something there with regards to performance that people are willing to, it's like if they have a better relationship with you, they might be willing to have this relationship with this content that you're trying to make the connection with. So that's kind of the goal of that. And so you take the survey, they take the survey, and then they're able to see how they connect with you. And then what's cool is I'll then ask the question, hey, how are we alike? How are we connected? And they'll say, hey, we both like music. Oh, that's awesome. What music are you into? And like, be able to have those sorts of connections. It's a really nice tool to use that you can set up initially to get ready to develop those relationships with your learners. Another one is using any sort of inventory. Like, this is an inventory I like to use. It's really simple, where they have all these words, and then those words align with animals, and those animals align with certain personality types. And is it scientific? And, all this, maybe not, but there's some truthiness to it. And all of a sudden we have a common language to talk about, like, oh, you're a lion, and oh, we got two lions in a group, and they might butt heads a little bit, or two otters in a group. Hey, make sure someone is paying attention to the details. Or we got a lot of golden retrievers. Everybody's concerned about feelings, so that sort of thing. And dealing with teachers, we've got a lot of golden retrievers in our classes that I teach. But anyway, those sorts of give you, and again, that's one simple inventory, but having stuff like that to have some sort of common language, or maybe you're really into the Enneagram, something like that, where you can develop those relationships with your learners. And then again, my friend Jen Wolf, I mentioned briefly before, developed this huge resource that we shared, she shared with me before I had to teach in the fall of 2020, where I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to be teaching online math methods class, which is a lot of hands-on stuff. I didn't even conceive of how I could teach that online. And she gave this resource. I'm definitely going to go here for this. If this is worth the price of admission, folks. Like, Jen went and like accumulated and developed all these or put together this huge slide deck that if you go to that link in or if you go to Amidon Planet, it's episode 29, amidonplanet.com, episode 29. There's this link to the resources that she shares. Now, there's a podcast episode audio, and then there's a video version of it. And she made this slide deck. Probably get 2 copies now. Let's see. So it's a forced copy situation. I'm talking big about it. No, I can't get it. I can get 4 of them now. And anyway, maybe everybody's doing it right now. So, oh, there it is. Okay, very good. So in this slide deck, there's 200 slides. There's a lot of slides, but there's some things that she's done in order, and she's already built them or she's accumulated them, and she gives credit to everyone that she got it from, where, hey, how do we make sure that we're being as, again, equitable and inclusive as possible in what we're using? So she's like, I'm going to do a lot of things in Google Slides. Google Slides is very approachable. If we're going to be using Zoom platform, let's be really intentional about the tools that we have available, right? Not just assume that people are do, or have people have to learn things through word of mouth. Or if I'm going to be using, some Google tools, what am I going to be doing, or some extensions and things, and how to do things with these things. So being very intentional with that. But she does things with building relationships that I really like, and I'm going to speed up to one. So like this is one. And this is a nice tool where, hey, all she wants you to do is show up, and the way you're going to show, what you're feeling that day is to take a star and drag it to what you're feeling, right? Now, this is, you might think, well, how good is that? Well, one, you're taking the temperature of the class, checking in, you're acknowledging their feelings, you're building a relationship that way, that you're saying, hey, 1 minute of my class time is worth this. But also, two, maybe later on in the class, she's going to have things, and I'll show you something later, where you're going to be sliding things around also around a Google slide. She wants to prep you for that. Just like if I was going to be using Jamboard for something heavier, I'm introduced it already. I introduced it something very low key, where it's like, hey, what's your name, institution, and what's your role in teaching? And now I'm going to have you do something else, like, hey, how do you think, where do you see teaching with social justice and what you've done or seen lately? So this is a huge resource that's available. I really can't overemphasize. I want you to take advantage of. But anyway, that's a long podcast and a huge resource that we'll actually talk about in a little bit as well. But just the building relationships piece in, checking in, making sure people are okay. Another thing that was mentioned in that episode, which is something that has been one of the best things I've done in my own teaching, is these I call them conversation grids. They're usually called name tents, where if you think about it in a face-to-face environment, this would be a full piece of paper that was folded. And on the top would be, the name Joel Amadon, and Joel Amadon on both sides. And I'd put that in front of me in a face-to-face environment, so everybody knows my name. On the back side, you would fill these in, where I'm going to be giving everyone a question. So a question could be like, if you had $1 billion, what charity would you donate to? Or if you had dinner and could have 3 people from history, who would you invite with and to have dinner with? Or what questions do you have for me about this course? Like anything like that. So you give them a prompt, they give a comment, and then eventually we'd provide a response. And so given we were doing this in a virtual environment, we actually did this where each of these was a Google Sheet. We did one of those forced copy, just like we did with the Google Slides that Jen Wolf put out, and everyone then linked it. And so we had a set of these available, so I could go through and answer back all these different things. And for each week, we had a prompt that we would respond to. And I tell you, this created so many different connections and resources, and then led to problem context that we used. It was such a cool thing to have in order to build that relationship with my learners, in order to best figure out how to teach them. Even though it was low key, you think like, what are the things that people care about? When people talk about the charities they care about, it's because their mom or dad has sick with something. So now I know when you miss, it's not just because you don't want to be in class, it's because of this situation, or they're trying to deal with certain things in their life. And you're like, okay, I'm becoming a better teacher of them because I have a little bit more knowledge about their experiences. Again, that's just 1 or 2 samples from that slide deck that I wanted to share. All right. We got one more relationship, but just in case, I'm going to go a little bit quick on this. But on the third thing, developing relationship with learners. I already see weekly check-in modules. Fantastic. Where students share their experiences for the week, add a self-care component to it. Fantastic. That's actually pretty good too, for me, thinking of, we're going to have, and so, yeah, it's the 4th slide in the Jamboard. If you have ideas on how you can develop relationships with learners, go ahead and put it there. Someone put develop mutual trust. So what are things that you do to develop mutual trust, right? So it could be like doing some of that, sharing some of your life with them. There's trust, right? I'm going to share this detail. Like, I have 3 kids. I'm trusting you a little bit with that, right? Like, maybe some people I don't want to share anything about my life. Well, so there is mutual trust. If you want to share them to share about you, you might have to it's probably going to be a little two-way street there. So consider students' perspectives. Fantastic. All right. I've also like developing relationship with learners, making sure, how are we doing with making sure that when considering students' perspectives, how many are we providing? A lot of different perspectives out there that could be allowing for different, asking lots of questions, follow up with survey responses. Fantastic. Again, some of these things are already built in, where also too, if you do that conversation grid, you put something out there, someone provides a response about, my mom is suffering from this. And then, hey, you know what? My mother-in-law is suffering from that as well. Right. And so having those conversations, again, develop the relationship, but then also developing like, hey, I'm here. I understand some of those things as well. Or somebody else is dealing with that same thing. Actually, I had something with my GA. She's grad assistant this year. She mentioned in one of her conversation grids that she was interested in teaching in a foreign country like Korea. And I knew somebody that did that. I was like, hey, we could make that connection. And all of a sudden this developed into something where she's going to take advantage of that. So leads to all sorts of things. We develop these relationships. All right. A little close on time. Here we go. So the final relationship, this is where thinking about process and product. So what are we going to do to help them engage with the content? And then what are we going to do to have them show their expertise? We already mentioned some of that with teaching with social justice. A lot of that had to do with process and product. So that's great. And again, I'm going to mention a lot of resources, because here's the thing, when coming back here, and the whole thing should be lit up. I have some of it, grayed out a little bit, but you develop the relationship with the content, you develop the relationship with the learners. Those two relationships dictate what we're going to use for process and product. And so, we're talking about, what was mentioned in the description about what Every Learn Everywhere does is build capacity. Okay. So when you're developing a relationship with process and product, you're basically saying, what are the things I could use given these learners with this content? So I know my content, I know my learners now. So I need to be knowledgeable of a variety of ways of attacking content in order to make it so that I can develop this desired relationship with the content. And so I need to be knowledgeable. So like one way to be knowledgeable is like, okay, what are some active and collaborative strategies for inclusive classrooms? What can we do? So this book from Alice Udvari-Solner called Joyful Learning, which again, shameful plug and discussed in this podcast. These are things that teachers actually did within classrooms that she then documented. She didn't just make up a series of things. No, she actually went and saw these things in action and then documented and make sure, hey, does this accurately represent something that could actually be done? And it becomes a spark. It becomes something like, oh, I want to have a way to assess an entire classroom very quickly using a prompt, using some sort of formative assessment. Oh, in this book is this thing called Stand and Deliver. Everyone stands up. We provide a prompt. One person provides a response to the prompt. Anyone that has the same response to the prompt and the person that gave it sits down. Then the rest of the class is still standing up. Like, oh, so what else could we do? And then the next person volunteers the response. Everyone has that response, sits down. So then by the time everyone's sitting down, everyone's voice has been represented. Even if all they did was stand up and sit down, still their perspective was represented maybe by someone else. Now you think like, okay, how do you do that online? Well, you do hand and deliver. You just put a hand up. And then when you agree with someone and then everyone's got their video on, you could do that. And you could do 5 times and then put your hand down. Right. So we've done that in our Zoom. So books like this, and this is just one example, but books like this become sparks, right? Become sparks and inspiration that you can use and think like, what are a variety of ways I could think of to get some interaction around this content, given, I have learners that are really excitable. They need to be stand up. They need to be move around. I got to do something what do I have in my toolbox to do that? So expanding your toolbox with books like this, these active learning strategy books, or other things like thinking about what Jen Wolfe had to provide in that PowerPoint presentation or that Google Slides presentation. I did want to show one thing. I want to show that one thing from here. Like, for example, so we talked about sliding around the stars and what that could be prepped for. Well, she created this thing that was something I used to do in a face-to-face environment. She created Google Slides for it. I'm getting to it. Again, it's a huge slide deck. So you get a number of students that are going to put these in order. The only thing is, if I'm the green player, I'm the green person, we're going to get these in order from least to greatest. And they're different representations of parts of a whole. We want to get these in order from least to greatest. And so I'm going to put, I own these and only I can slide these in. You own, the other person owns these, then only they can slide these in. And we're going to negotiate together how to get these into place. And we do this in small group Zoom rooms. And what's cool about that is this creates we did the sliding of the stars up above. Now we're sliding down here. Now we're thinking about how do we put these in order, but we have to talk to each other and collaborate. This is complex instruction. And that's the specific name, Complex Instruction by Elizabeth Cohen. Anyway, there's lots of good resources on complex instruction, well, that we talk about in that podcast episode. But it's one of those things where, hey, here's a way that we can show our learning in a collaboratively and develop this interpersonal type product in order to make sure that we're demonstrating our knowledge of, in that case, fractions. So, and then I have another episode on teaching math at a distance book club, where all sorts of different resources, again, math specific, but there's some lessons I think to be learned that could be applied across different content areas as well. And then how else are we developing our relationship with product and process? We come to stuff like this, right? We're doing this to get ideas and resources and things that we can do. And I think having this idea, this framework of thinking about developing these relationships with product and processes, learners, and with content, and think about how do we use those relationships? How do we develop those with the intention of being more equitable and inclusive? Thinking like, who can be in my classroom? How am I preparing myself to be in line to whoever walks in the room, that this is an open place, a welcome place for them to learn, grow, and thrive. And so I don't know how much time we have. If we have some time, if people can put how they might have developed the relationship with products and processes within the Jamboard. But otherwise, I wonder if there's any, we're kind of to the end where if there's any questions. Basically, again, we're talking about, Norma's talking about building capacity, and I'm trying to, if you have a cup, I'm trying to fill it up with as much ways that you could learn more as possible. But what's cool is seeing what all the other stuff that people have put out into the world as well. So, yeah, I don't know. Was it Patty? Was any questions in the chat?
Everybody's been so busy in the Jamboard that there's nothing in the Q&A session. There's been some things going on in the chat, but most of it's going on in the Jamboard.
Awesome. Well, let me, I'm going to check that final page of the Jamboard. But there is something that I did want to, so if people are interested in, there's one thing I didn't mention. And it's from Every Learner Everywhere. It's the tool for getting started with equity, a guide for academic department leaders. Jeremiah Sims, who is, if you saw him speak yesterday, he does the impact framework, and then EJ Edney and some other authors. I think Patty was one of the authors too, that put together that getting started with equity guide for academic department leaders. In there is a audit, a structure for auditing your instruction, thinking about how are you addressing these issues. So like one simple thing in thinking about this idea of developing relationships, I want to develop a kind of relationship with content, and I can stop sharing for a sec. I want to develop a relationship with content that is showing that, hey, you are going to be learning from each other. Well, just look at your classroom. What does your classroom say? If your classroom has a bunch of desks that are screwed to the floor and facing forward, your environment doesn't say that, right? It's not saying that, hey, we want to have a collaborative experience around content. We want to be like, hey, listen to me, I'm at the board. That's the most important thing. So even to think about what your environment has to say and what kind of relationships you want people to develop with content can be a lot. So I think that tool could be a cool way to take a look at what you're doing. I know it says for department leaders, but there's pieces in there that you'd be like, I want to just look at my class, and it's pretty good. I like it.
The chat has quieted down.
All right. Anyway, so thank you so much for being here. I know we have a kind of a crazy situation here in Oxford where all the schools got shut down. So anyway, but thank you.
Oh, we thank you for all your time and your energy and everything that's going on for you. This was just a really exciting session. I was really mesmerized by all of the movement in the Jamboard, all the thoughts and all the activity. I'm excited to see that people can do better than me and they can pay attention to the Jamboard and listen to you at the same time. Patty and I were talking about, we're so into the listening to what you have to say, we were forgetting to check the chat. This was really wonderful. This was exciting. Thank you, Joel, for such an energetic and enthusiastic session that we had for today. I do want to let our audience know that you can access the Strategies for Success recordings using the Strategies for Success YouTube channel. Patty's going to toss that link in the chat for you. We do ask that you take a few minutes out to complete our survey for today's presentation. That link is also going to be put in the chat. If you've got something going on immediately after, don't worry about it. We'll send you the link to the survey as well as the link to the YouTube channel in the email that follows up tomorrow that you'll get regarding the webinar here. Just some quick notes. Don't forget, we've got some more Strategies for Success presentations, the 20th, the 27th, and the 28th. And then also just to touch, we've got a WCET webcast coming up on the 20th. And one of the panelists is our Executive Director, Jessica Rowland Williams. So that's going to be an exciting conversation. And then on coming up in January through May, we've got a partnership with Achieving the Dream, and there's an operationalizing equity, social justice, and inclusion to transform teaching and learning. It's a webinar series. It's going to be really awesome. So we hope to see you all looking for that as well. Just visit the Every Learner website, our workshop page, our resources page. We've got a lot of stuff on there for you all. Again, thank you to Joel, and thank you to our audience for participating in today's discussion. We look forward to seeing you next week for our webinar, Engage Using Adaptive Courseware and Digital Technology to Enhance Student Learning, as well as hope to see you at future Every Learner Everywhere events. We want y'all to have a wonderful day and enjoy your long weekend if you get a 3-day weekend. See ya.